Hello, and welcome to the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group Biweekly Sync. It is January 31st, 2019. Already 1 month down in 2019. Time is just flying. Let's go ahead and get started with our meeting today. As always, we start with a quick description for folks that might be new to the call or new to watching the recordings. What is this call all about? Well, we are a part of the larger SharePoint Patterns and Practices program. And this call was set up to focus on SharePoint Framework, the PnP JS libraries, the Office 365 CLI, the Reusable Controls, and the Community Yeoman generator, because we just didn't have enough time in, for example, the monthly calls to really cover out on all the topics we really wanted to review. So we started these special interest group calls, and we got in. This was the first, and we also have on alternating weeks a PowerShell and CSOM call. So feel free, of course, to join both or either of those calls. We always appreciate everybody attending the calls and getting the great feedback from the conversation here. 2 links down there at the bottom, aka.ms/SPPnP-community, will take you to the SharePoint section of the Microsoft Tech community. That's a great place to ask general development questions, things that are not necessarily related to any of the particular libraries that might be more architectural or more design related or more just sort of general questions. So Tech community, a great place for that. Second link there, aka ms/spdev-docs, takes you to the all-up SharePoint developer documentation. So that includes all of the CSOM managed code, WSP deployment documentation, as well as the docs if you're looking to get started with SharePoint Framework. You've got all the tutorials there. And then, sorry, folks can see the slides? Looks like some folks can. If you can't see the slides, maybe drop and rejoin. Sometimes that helps. So hopefully folks are seeing those. And so the documentation is the all-up SharePoint developer documentation. So if you see gaps, see holes, please report that. There should be links there for reporting issues or making comments right on the documentation. It's a great way to do that. And then, so no audio. I feel like some folks can hear me.
Yeah, all good.
Yep. Okay, great. Just get nervous. Cool. So I think we've covered out that slide. So our agenda for today, we've got the engineering update on SharePoint Framework as always. We've got our patterns and practices program updates. So the 4 areas there. And then we got 2 great demos. The first from Yannick on how to use Office UI Fabric panels in your SPFx solutions. Very cool demo. And then Andrew has a simplifying SPFx testing with Jest Presets. Another great demo showing 2 fantastic capabilities you can start using in your project. So excited to see those later in the call. And then likely we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end, he always says. Excuse me, for folks looking to get involved or participate a little bit more in the Patterns and Practices program, the way to get involved is really to just start getting involved. So the first thing I'd really encourage everyone and anyone out there, if you have something cool you're working on, you'd like to demo it, whether it's a SharePoint Framework demo, that could be a web part, an application customizer, something around provisioning, something you might have created around really anything SPFX, and then, of course, anything involving any of the @PnP family of libraries. So PnP JS, the CLI, the Reusable Controls, or the Community Yeoman generator, and then any combination of these things. So using those things inside SPFX, etc. Love to see those demos. Love to see what folks out there in the community are coming up with. It's really exciting, and I know, and I've said it before, and we'll continue to say it, I think it's one of the most valuable parts of these calls, because I know I always learn something new from the demos, and hopefully you all do as well. Other ways to get involved, contribute on GitHub. You can always report issues, submit pull requests, and help as well with issues and questions. So if you see folks that have ask questions and maybe you know the answer, or maybe you've run into that before, always appreciate folks jumping in and helping out. And then if you do see a problem with one of the libraries you're using, do always please report that. That helps us get it fixed, and we'd love to hear about it and see what we can do to help versus somebody just being upset with one of the libraries or one of the controls or something like that, and us not hearing about it. So appreciate all that feedback. And then in general, always appreciate feedback on the calls, the documentation needs, and other ways we can generally improve the patterns and practices program. So I will always say it's not we can't always act on every piece of feedback immediately, so please don't get discouraged if you give us some feedback and we're not able to change things right away, but we do definitely take all that feedback to heart. We definitely talk about that feedback in the team, and we do our best to adjust the program and adjust what we're doing to better fit everybody's needs. So we appreciate that feedback, and it really drives what we do and drives how we're trying to grow the program. Clicking, there we go. And so now, engineering update from Vesa on SharePoint Framework. Engineering update from Vesa on SharePoint Framework. Vesa may want to take himself off mute.
No.
Hey, there we go.
Ooh, when you're traveling, it's a different computer than calling from home. Okay, so let's actually get moving on this one. So a few new updates. So just a recap on our resources, SharePoint Dev Documents, aka SP Dev Docs, SharePoint Dev Videos, where this recording will be provided as well. So if you don't have time to watch the whole thing live, or you want to go back and watch any of the previous demos, community demos, or recordings, everything is available on YouTube. And SharePoint Dev Issues for anything related on SharePoint development, APIs, things which you might run into in on-premises or SharePoint Online. Now, a few things what I wanted to actually go through from a SharePoint Framework perspective. First of all, just a reminder for everybody, we do have this updated SharePoint Framework developer training package available. I will reschedule promotions on this one in the SharePoint and Office Dev Twitter tweets and social media later. But just a reminder on this one, this is a great resource with the videos and hands-on labs and demo material if you want to learn by yourself or if you want to deliver a training for anybody else. So it includes, for example, a module related on using Microsoft Graph and third-party APIs with SharePoint Framework, or if you're just looking into getting started guidance and what does the SharePoint Framework actually means. There is a great videos and guidance on that one as well. AKMS SPFx training is the URL. We will most likely update that AKMS address at some point when we create a more, let's say, fancier starting point for the training package. Now, we have already plans for improving this, so it will be extended by 3 additional modules, which are currently in development. And those modules, for example, include the specific module on creating Microsoft Teams tabs using SharePoint Framework, because that's one of the things which will go general availability relatively soon, so within weeks rather than in months, so as part of the 1.8 release. Now, moving on things, quick updates on things, just showing you the metrics as well. We actually broke one big milestone earlier today, which is a great thing, which I can't really share the exact numbers, but the growth is unheard of. So this is, we at this point, we have no way of even predicting what will be the end result within this calendar year, because the growth is exponential, as you can see from the usage chart. So this is basically showing the third-party SPFx usage in SharePoint Online. You can see the Christmas impact, obviously. There was a massive dip on the Christmas and holidays, which is completely understandable, but then after holidays, it's back on track on that exponential growth. And it just, how would I put this? We have never seen this kind of a growth on any development model in our side. So people are adapting SharePoint Framework, and that's also actually one of the reasons why we're now looking into extending the SharePoint Framework usage, obviously, because clearly you as a developer and the community want to embrace this model. It has taken a while for people to accept that it's a new model if you come from a farm solution side, and it thus has a learning curve. But after you learn that, you are no longer a specific developer for SharePoint, so you can actually do development in any other industry standard ways of doing web stack development. And now we're kind of extending then the SharePoint framework development also to Microsoft Teams, so creating Microsoft Teams tabs using SharePoint framework. But not only that, and that's the one thing what I wanted to actually talk about today as well, after the roadmap slide. Now, in 1.8, I cannot give you the exact date because I don't want to promise you a date which might still slip. So at this point, we're looking into slipping for a few days or 1 week. So, but it's coming relatively soon. So we're talking about 1.8 release during this quarter. This quarter means by end of March. So we're basically going to release 1.8 within weeks rather than in months. And that's going to then contain general availability of Microsoft Teams development with SharePoint Framework. It's going to contain the single part app pages support, isolated web parts, and provided hosted solutions in SharePoint site. So if you have a Teams application, you can actually run them in SharePoint site. Now, other topics bubbling under, which we are currently then planning already, because 1.8 is locked already. One of the reasons why I'm this week in Redmond is that we've been having a long discussions related on the store and app store story for SharePoint Framework, and there are kind of ongoing discussions on what do we want to do with SharePoint adding model. Obviously, we're not going to shut down things by a snap of a finger, but we obviously the SharePoint Framework is the future of the SharePoint development. So we're looking into now then enabling SharePoint Framework in store, enabling ISVs or system integrators or smaller companies to actually provide their services and customizations from a centralized marketplace. So basically SharePoint Store or App Source or both in this case. And there's an interesting set of plans on this. Now, SharePoint Framework library package support in third-party developers is under development, actually. So a person with a room I stole today is not actually working here this week, so he's working on that one currently. And then the interesting thing here is the last bullet point. So, and this is something which we want to have your input, and this is why I requested people to, well, I hinted on the future direction on SPFx in Twitter as well. So what if you could implement Office client add-ins using SharePoint Framework? So we are releasing the Microsoft Teams tabs development using SharePoint Framework as 1.8. So now we're looking into potentially have at least a preview of the Office add-ins development using SharePoint Framework in 1.9. And I can't give you an exact date, but you can estimate that 1.9 comes out on the second quarter of this calendar year. And that's actually then that what it means is that, well, the SharePoint Framework is no longer then specific on SharePoint Framework. And this was one of the slides which I had in my presentation graphics. And somebody already jumped on Twitter saying at some point that, what do you mean? Why are you renaming SharePoint Framework? Well, we're looking into that potentially because SharePoint Framework is being used not just in SharePoint. So it's going to be then renamed for something else. So obviously we have the SharePoint Framework capability, SharePoint Framework supported in Microsoft, in SharePoint Online or in SharePoint 2019. As part of the 1.8, we are releasing SharePoint Framework support for Microsoft Teams. And is it then still a SharePoint framework because you're actually using that for Teams development? And now the next step, like already noted, is that we're looking into having then SharePoint framework development support for Office add-ins. And this is something where we actually need your input on. And that's why I wanted to have a kind of explain this one step at a time. Now, Office add-ins, the idea would be that the task pane, which is a panel basically, would be a one implementation style for SharePoint framework. So when you run a SharePoint framework, whatever that would be called at that point, let's call it Patrick framework. That probably would be good, Patrick. So so whatever you run the Yeoman generator, you can then ask where do you want to surface this customization, and that will then make sure that it has the right settings. So you can actually then choose, is it a SharePoint web part, is it a Microsoft Teams web part, is it a single page application or single page app part, which is one option released in 1.8, or is it then a Office add-in exposed functionality. And in the Office add-ins exposed functionality, there's two different options, which is the task pane and then the actual contextual apps inside of the document. And obviously you would be still able to access the Office JS, but you would have the development experience using the familiar SharePoint framework, and you would have all the goodies related on graph, API access, and all of that stuff using the SharePoint framework, like, well, whatever we called at that point, SharePoint framework infrastructure. So you would use the exact same development experience across all of these platforms. And now to ask what I would have for this one is actually collect your input on this one. So I do have a quick survey if you would have time. So this is like 3 to 5 minutes max. It is basically select, are you interested, does it sound interesting, and then a few free text boxes, which we would appreciate your input on, basically asking scenarios as well. So do you have a scenario which is now currently difficult to do in Office settings, and would this help you to enable that thing? Or is it more on the fact that, well, having a unified development model makes sense because you learn a one model, then you can do all of these customizations. So that should actually help on, that will help on, in general in SharePoint engineering, well, actually in Microsoft 365 engineering, then have that discussion in our side. Patrick, do you have something to jump in? You're unmuted. So I'm just curious. No. Never mind. Okay. But so please give us feedback. There was also an amount of already comments in Ion window. A lot of those could be actually added on the survey, so we get them stored, because me going through the video after this, the recording, and then collecting the input from the Ion window is relatively hard. But whatever the naming, by the way, will be, that let's let the marketing people to decide that. So let's see how that actually goes. But please answer the survey. It really seriously takes like max 5 minutes or 3 to 5 minutes, and we'll get some sort of an idea how this would actually help you. It is a relatively simple survey, which I just spin up yesterday. So, but thank you for your input, and thanks, Bill, for the. Let's have that marketing teams to decide. Well, we'll see how that goes. Cool. Patrick FX is a really good suggestion, right, Patrick?
I agree. I mean, I think throw a K at the end there, and we're good to go.
Yeah.
You did, because I was going to take over the presentation, but you vamped a little longer than I thought you were going to. So
sorry. It's not unheard that I will take more time than expected.
But it's not. But that's why I'd unmuted to answer your question. Interrupting, and well, now here we are.
Yeah.
PnP client-side libraries. So this will be a quick update through the parts of the PnP program. So the PnP JS client-side libraries. Quick update here. We're doing the 1.2.9 release. That's scheduled for next Friday. The beta releases continue generally on Fridays, but sometimes middle of the week. Those aren't super duper predictable, but those give you a nice preview of what's new and allow us to get fixes to folks a little faster in some cases when folks are blocked for the, on something that won't be out till the main release. Again, wanted to mention we're starting to think about 2.0, starting to roadmap that out. We don't have any schedule or timeline or target dates for releasing that yet. I've got some ideas I'm working on that I'm excited, hopefully, to share with everybody soon, but not quite ready to share them yet. Definitely want to encourage folks' feedback on the issues list. So we've got some items tagged there or labeled there as roadmap. So really encourage you to get your feedback there. We want to, major releases. So like going from 1.0 to 2.0 is a real opportunity to make some big changes to the library and some big changes to the structure of the library. So if you have ideas, definitely would like to hear those. Just go ahead and drop them in there. Or if you want to comment on existing ones, just definitely let us know as well. And I do want to make a mention, one of the things we're talking about doing is dropping support for IE11 in 2.0. And every time we talk about this, I know exactly what everybody's going to say, but I want to preface all that with the idea that just because 2.0 doesn't support IE11 doesn't mean that the 1.x's go away. Those are still there and would be usable for folks that have that support profile that they need or are required to do. So it's not the end of the world, and we're also realistically at least, I'd say, 6 months from 2.0 coming out. And then generally in the past, we've supported continue to support prior versions for at least another 3 to 6 months. So, it's another year of support at least for the 1.x stuff, if not longer. So don't freak out, but do start to think about there will come a day when IE 11 is no longer supported across Office 365. So start to think about that a little bit now. Just sort of mentioning that out there. And then I want to, of course, always thank everyone again. Thank you to all the contributors. We're getting some great feedback, great issues, and great pull requests from everybody out there in the community. So very much appreciate all of that from folks. Link down there at the bottom, pnp.github.io/pnpjs, gets you the documentation for all the PnP JS libraries, and you can follow the hashtag PnP JS on Twitter. And love to get your feedback and things there. Updates now on Office 365 CLI. A new beta was released, 1.13.0, with commands for getting list views, getting list site scripts, listing sites associated with hub sites, and support for SPOD. In progress are some more commands, of course, but this is also a place in the CLI, a great place to contribute. Each of the commands is fairly atomic to write. You don't have to learn necessarily all the details of every other command, so a great way to contribute there. And as well, Waldeck and the folks who contribute and help out there are very interested in hearing what commands would be helpful to you. So very much want to hear that feedback as well. You can always install the latest beta from npm install-g at pnp/office365-cli at next. We'll always get you the latest beta. You can find more information at aka.ms/o365-cli. We'll take you to the documentation and other resources to help you get started. As well, there is a Gitter channel, gitter.im/office365-cli, and the hashtag Office365CLI on Twitter is what you can follow for the latest updates on the CLI. Excuse me, updates around the reusable SPFx controls. There are, just a reminder, 2 separate packages. A package of property controls. Property controls are used in the edit pane of your web parts, and those allow you to have a very rich editing experience. And then the content controls are used in the body of your web parts to give you a very nice and rich presentation experience. Both of these libraries are styled with the Office UI fabric, so you're going to get a very nice out-of-the-box integrated look with your controls, and it's going to save you a ton of development time on both your application customizers and your web parts and your web part edit panes. So really take a look at these if you haven't. If you're doing SharePoint framework development, a lot of great stuff in there, lots of great capabilities to really enhance the projects you're writing, and to bring some extra capabilities there without you having to roll that functionality yourself. And then some recent highlights: property field enterprise term picker control. There's a map control, which is very cool. It uses a map. You can obviously enter coordinates and show different things on the map. A chart control, and a constant improvements to the existing controls. And again, all of that, I keep harping on this, but all of that driven by your feedback and your experiences out there using this stuff every day. Can we get a control that? So the answer to can we get a control that is please go add an issue to the SharePoint GitHub repository issues list, and that's the kind of feedback that Elio and the folks working on those things really love to hear, and would encourage you to submit your feedback there, and we'll definitely absolutely see what we can do to get that added in. So more information, SharePoint github.io /sp-dev-fx-property-controls, and then -controls-react gets you the property controls and the content controls respectively. So that'll be the documentation for those and getting started there. The community Yeoman generator, and I'm going to pause for a second because last time I started this and Vesa jumped on me. Is Stefan on the call? Did he want to do this update, or am I good to...
I can't see Sebastian. Oh, Stefan, sorry, Stefan. Stefan is not on the call. So,
Not? Okay, cool. In that case, so for those of you, this is one of the newer additions to the PnP family of solutions for SPFx, and this is an open source Yeoman generator that has been developed again as part of the program here. It's built on top of the out-of-the-box SharePoint framework Yeoman generator. So if you use this generator, you're going to get a standard SharePoint framework project with all the same dependencies and all the same backing code, but with a few extras added in on top. So you have the some enhanced choices around frameworks to use. For example, handlebars, Angular elements, Vue.js. So those are some ones not included in the standard SharePoint framework generator. And then as well, you have some additional configuration options. You can add in the PnP JS libraries. And just with the new release 1.6.1 that just came out, I think yesterday, the day before, there's now Jest testing framework support for the no framework projects, as well as a new command that gets added in to the set of available gulp commands, gulp dist, that handles, kind of rolls up those multiple commands you generally had to run for production builds. So bundling and packaging and so forth is now rolled up into that gulp dist command. And as well, some of the packages you can choose to add, updates on Vue handlebars, and then as well, the PnP JS and the property controls have been updated. This is a typo, so I've got SPFx property controls there twice. The property controls and the content controls have been updated to the latest version. So apologies for that typo. That's my fault on that. And then in progress, what's being worked on is adding features to existing projects. So the ability to come back with this Yeoman generator for projects and add in things like that gulp dist command or the Jest support to your existing projects that may or may not have been created initially with this community-supported Yeoman generator. To install the generator, you can always npm install -g at pnp generator-spfx. And for more information, check out pnp.github.io/generator-spfx for all your documentation and getting started needs. So moving forward to the demos, first up is Yannick. Yannick, are you on the call and ready to take over?
I'm here. You hear me?
Hello, yes.
Good. Good. Okay, I'm sharing my screen.
I've got loading on my side.
You get it? Good.
All right, looks like folks got it. Take it away, Yannick.
Thank you. So just a little bit of introduction before. So my name is Yannick Plenevaux. I'm a SharePoint and Office 365 architect. I recently founded my own company, so I'm doing more and more SharePoint and Office 365 that I really like to do, so it's good. My demo today is about using Office UI Fabric panel within the SharePoint framework solution, and more especially within list view command set extensions. So a panel in Office UI Fabric is a component that you can use. It is a React component, so you have to a React setup in your solution, and you can use it and to display this kind of thing, like here you can see on the Office UI Fabric site. So first of all, I will show you how it is done in a web part, so in a regular web part solution. It's really easy to do. So here I have a web part in the workbench, and when I click the open button, open panel button, I have a panel showing up. So in the code, it looks like this. So let's go to my web part. So I have a React component here, and in the render method, I have the thing that displays in the web part, and I have the panel here. Okay, and the isOpen property of the panel actually tells the panel whether it should show or hide. So when I click the button, and it calls the open panel method, update the state of the React component and the show panel property. So re-execute the render method and display panel because the show panel property is set to true. It is the React component in the class of the web part itself. It is how it just rendered the React component. So it instantiates the component and then call the React DOM render method with the element instance and the DOM element, the element in the DOM, the React component will be inserted in. So it all started for me when I wanted actually to use this panel, but in the context of for example, like this, I have a list here, a simple, and then when I select an item, I have a comment in the ribbon here in the comment bar, really appearing. So if I click the button, it opens up a panel on the site with a full custom UI and a full custom business logic that I would like to implement. So here, nothing really fancy, just to update the title of the list item. When I click the apply, it calls using the PnP JS, it calls the REST API and update the title. So really nothing big here, but when it comes to implement the thing, actually you have a step more than just you doing it in like you would do it in the web part. So here I have the comment set class, the list view comment set class, and when you the list view comment set extension, actually you don't have anything related to React because you maybe don't want to have a UI at all. So you don't have anything with React or any other framework. So the first thing you have to do is actually to add the dependencies to the React and also to the Office UI Fabric package. So in the package.json here, you see that the dependencies I have added, actually in that case, I scaffolded the project with a web part first, and I chose the React framework, so it already did it for me. I only added the Office UI Fabric React. By the way, I had to set the version to 5 because there is apparently some issues with version of Office UI Fabric React with SPFx. But anyway.
Quickly, Yannick, on that one, that relates on the version of the TypeScript being used, and we are working on that one, which should be fixed on 1.8. So
okay.
Fabric is using a newer version, which SPFx is not yet using. So.
I didn't really investigate how to fix it. I just fall back to version 5 and it was working. So back to my list view comment set extension here. So what I want to do is when I click the button, I want to show the panel. Okay, on execute method from the list view comment set, I get the properties I need for the list item, etc., and call the show panel method. And the show panel method is actually just calling the method to render the panel component, and you see the show panel and the dismiss panel method are both rendering the panel. One is supposed to render the fact that it hides the panel. Okay, and this render panel component method is actually just doing exactly the same thing as you would have in the web part, the web part class here in the render method. So instantiate the React component and call the render method from the React DOM. So if I go back to here, it is what we do: instantiate the React component and calling the render method. This React component that I have here, I added in a components folder that I created, and created a custom panel.yesx file with the custom panel React component here. And this one, actually, in the render method of the React component, as the root component, I render a panel with all the contents in it. Okay, and also the is open value that comes from the component property. This property, I pass it in here. In this case, so here or here. And the single a bit, I would say, tricky at all, it is that in the context of a list view command set, you don't have actually any reference to a DOM element. In the web part, you would have here this .dom element, but here you see that we don't have it. Okay, and we don't have either a placeholder provider like we would have in the application customizer context. So we are really that we have to pass it in a natural element that we created. We create to host the React component. So how could we do that? Simply because we are in JavaScript. We can create an element, and we can actually do some kind of DOM injection. It is some kind of a simple DOM injection. Actually, we are creating a div element, and we append it to the body of the DOM. We keep the reference to this element, and we use it when we need it in the render method of the React DOM. So it is that simple, but we have to know it to be able to use an Office UI Fabric React panel in a list view command set in SharePoint Framework. And that's it. It's really nothing more, but it's a way that we can in SharePoint Framework list view command sets.
Great stuff. Very cool, and very great usage of the Office UI Fabric components. So really good to see that. Hopefully a lot of folks can take that example and roll with it. A lot of the components work very similar, so it's a great way to get started with any and all of them. So with that, make Andrew a presenter. And now I think we're ready to switch over to Andrew. Thank you, Yannick, very much. Appreciate the demo.
You're welcome.
Oh, and do you have that? Yeah, so there's the blog post there. David has just pasted that into the chat window there. Perfect stuff. And the link to the sample. Great stuff. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Yannick. And Andrew, you ready to go?
I'm ready. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, cool. So I started sharing. Somebody would let me know when you can see a slide with my ugly mug on it.
I got it, at least in Redmond.
Cool. So I'm ugly across the country now. All right. So thanks a lot for the time today. Hopefully won't take up the entire 20 minutes that we have here. But I guess this is Andrew Connell. You got some contact information about me there on the slide. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about testing in the SharePoint framework, coming to you from absolutely cold Florida, where it's actually colder here than it is in Alaska. All right, so one of my passions with the SharePoint framework is trying to make things easier for us developers. And one of the things that I have a lot of frustration with the SharePoint framework is around testing, or at least I did it initially, and now I'm not so frustrated anymore. And I want to show you kind of how I did it and why I like it. So out of the box, the SharePoint framework Yeoman generator scaffolding is going to generate your project, and the project that you get is really going to be set up initially to work with Mocha and Chai, which Mocha is a test runner and test library that you can use to write unit tests. And Chai is an assertion library. It kind of goes hand in hand. You think Mocha and Chai is the tea and coffee. And anyway, so the way that this is how things were when SharePoint Framework originally shipped. And when it first came out, I want sympathy, Stephanie. The way that things originally shipped, we were using these tools primarily for testing. Internally in Microsoft, they actually switched over and they use a different tool, the one that I'm going to show you how to use in just a few minutes. Now, one of the ways that they're all set up to do all of their testing is that whenever you go run your tests, you end up running a gulp task called gulp test. And what that does is that goes through the entire building and bundling process to build up the bundle, and then it runs your tests against the bundle that you create, which is great, but I'm going to block out those comments. So it's slow. It's a slow process to get your tests going. And on a default SharePoint install on a relatively new laptop, fast machine, on an out-of-the-box experience here, out-of-the-box project, it can take up to 10 seconds just to get your first test to start running. So that was a little too, that wasn't really a great experience for me. So I was trying to find something that would be a little bit faster. And there's another tool out there, another testing tool out there called Jest, which is by the Facebook team. It was originally done for those of us who are working with Webpack, but it works, or sorry, not Webpack, with React, but it works just as good with non-React projects as well. So what I would recommend that you try and that you consider is to get rid of Mocha and Chai for your testing solution and your JavaScript projects, and instead decouple them and use Jest, and then also decouple your tests from the SharePoint Framework build process. Now, in order to get this to work, it does require a little bit of setup work. So let me kind of walk through a little bit of what this is. And don't worry, I'm going to give you the bad story and then the better story. So the way you're going to do this, the way you set up your projects for working with Jest is you get a multi-step process. So you don't have to do the very first one, but to keep it clean, you're going to want to remove Mocha and Chai, specifically the TypeScript type declarations from your project. You can see that in the first line, a little code snippet you see down there at the bottom. Then you're going to install the Jest tool, which is just a little runtime utility. That includes not only the test runner and the harness, but it also includes everything else that you used to get with both Mocha and Chai. So again, Mocha was a test runner and a test library. We get that as 2-in-1 in Jest. And then Chai was an assertion library. So when you run your tests, for a test to fail, you would have to generally throw an exception or throw an error. And what an assertion library does, it allows you to say things like, I expect this variable to equal 1. And if it doesn't, then write this error message out. And then it just makes it a little bit cleaner to write your tests. Jest has an assertion library in it already. So you don't need two things. You just need the one for everything. Because we're using TypeScript and Jest is by default, it's expecting JavaScript, you have to add in a preprocessor that tells Jest to compile all the TypeScript down to JavaScript first. And then you're also going to want to install some type declarations to making working with the assertion libraries a little bit easier. Now, the last thing you end up having to do is you're going to end up creating some sort of a Jest configuration. And what this does is it tells, you can do all this on the command line every time you run it, but that's a pain. So you can create a configuration object that lives either in the package.json file or is going to live in a separate config file. And what that does is it just sets all the default settings that you would need inside of Jest when you run it. So telling it to use the the preprocessor, and where should it look for test files, and where should it look for code files, etc. The last thing you do that I would recommend you do at least is to update your test script that you have in the package.json file so that you can just run npm test and it will do all the stuff that it needs to run Jest and to plug in the configuration file and make your life a heck of a lot easier, as you can see there from the code at the bottom. That's a lot of stuff to do, though. Now, that's one thing that I wanted to look at, but the next thing is, what if you're going to be using React? So when you want to test your React components, you generally want to test the rendering of these. And when I say rendering, I don't mean like the way it shows up on the screen. I mean, let's see the resulting markup that comes out that would be rendered by the browser. I don't care how it's rendered. I just want to make sure that the markup is correct because, well, that's really the only thing that I can really test for in a really easy and fast way. Jest by default includes something called the React Test Renderer. What that is it just allows you to give it a React component and it can render out the component and spit out the HTML and do the test for it. It has a concept called shallow rendering. So if you have nested components, it's only going to render out the one that you're telling it you want it to render. So other nested components inside of it won't be rendered out as well. So you don't get a whole tree. You just test the one that you're looking at. Has a concept of snapshots, which is basically going to say, here's what the HTML should look like. And if it's not, then throw an error. Now, this renderer is nice, but it's pretty simple. It's pretty limited. And what some other people ended up doing was, I'll touch on in a second, is they built a better renderer that we all end up using. So if you're testing React with Jest, how do you do this? Well, you're going to have to install the test renderer first. You're probably, because we're using TypeScript in the SharePoint framework, you're going to want to install the type declaration as well. And then there's this other thing called the identity object proxy. And what that is, and you can kind of see that in the code snippet down there at the bottom in my config file. Effectively, what this is saying is that, hey, when the test engine, when you run across a reference that's trying to ingest a CSS or a SAS file, just ignore it. So the identity object proxy is just saying, don't do anything with this. Just treat it as an inert thing. Just kind of bypass it. Otherwise, you get these weird things that show up. All right, so that's just some of the other configuration you do when you're doing your testing here. Apparently, it's turned into a weather update in the chat. So then you say, well, I want to go on to the next level here. I want to do something a little bit more with the rendering. And there's a company called Airbnb. Everybody's probably heard of it. What they did is they created a better rendering engine than what we get out of the box in React. And this engine is called Enzyme. And what's so cool about this is that it's designed to kind of sit on top of the out-of-the-box renderer, but it gives us a lot of really cool capabilities and makes things a lot easier. For example, it's very easy to get access to a component that's been rendered and then simulate the clicking of a button and reacting to those different events. In order to use it, though, you've got to have this other thing installed. And you guys may be looking at this and rolling your eyes going, geez, he's telling me all this stuff that I have to do to get this to work. I mean, trust me, things are going to get better in just a minute. So how do you set up Enzyme? You know, oh, my God, look at all this stuff at the bottom. I've got to install Enzyme, and I have to install the Enzyme engine first. And then I have to install an adapter because the engine works with all versions of React, but I might need one for React 15 or I may need one for React 16. And that's where we have adapters to do that. And then, oh yeah, I'm in TypeScript, so I need type declarations. And I need this thing called Enzyme to JSON to make snapshots a little bit easier. And then I'm going to need this thing called a polyfill called the Request Animation Frames Polyfill, RAF, to simulate the fact that there's a special API in a browser that's not in the headless browsers that Jest is using. And then I got to go through and set up all of this stuff with Enzyme. And I do that by initializing Enzyme and then initializing the adapter and then wiring those two together and then go into the configuration file and say, hey, Jest, when you run, go run that setup file that sets up Enzyme. It's a lot of stuff to do. And then let's throw a little bit more complexity onto it. There are two different versions of React that a lot of our SharePoint framework projects are using today. It wasn't until just recently that the SharePoint framework version 1.7 came out that revs support for React 16. Prior to that, we were on React 15. Well, there's a bit of a challenge here because when you look at the tools that we use for React 16, some of those tools are expecting us to use the latest version of TypeScript, which we're not doing today in the SharePoint framework. There was a thing in the chat just a few minutes ago where we may see that change in 1.8. But for example, the the TypeScript preprocessor expects you to be using TypeScript version 3. And we're still on 2.4.2. So you've got all these special versions you got to keep track of and everything, and it's a royal pain. But things are easier. All right, so this is where the good story kicks in. So what I've done is I went ahead and I created these things called presets. And what it does is it says, instead of all that stuff that I just went through with you, you're going to be able to very easily just say, I want to use Jest on my project. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to first install Jest, and then I'm going to install the appropriate preset in my project based on what I'm doing. Maybe I'm no React. Maybe I'm React 15. Maybe I'm React 16. Then, after you do that, you're going to want to start testing for fun, productivity, and profit. And why do I say profit? Because these warrior horses, as Chris has showed us in the past, these things get expensive. And so you need the profit to be able to pay for all the food that these things are going to use. If you want to learn more about it, I've got a blog post that explains it, but here's the easy part. I'm going to do a demo in just a second. If you're not using React, it's very simple. You just go say npm install, or in my case, I'm using yarn add. You tell it you want to install Jest, and then the preset you want. And then the -d at the end says, I only care about this stuff in a developer environment, so only install it as a dev dependency. And then the same thing is true with React 15 and React 16. So let's take a look at this. So if I jump over here to my machine, what I've got is just a standard SharePoint framework project that is using React. So you can see here I'm using React 16. Now, notice a little bit farther down that in the dev dependencies, I don't have any mention of Jest anywhere. And in addition, over here in my test, you see I'm using gulp test. So this is just a standard out-of-the-box SharePoint framework web part done as React. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this thing up for working with Jest and our Jest preset that I talked about just a few minutes ago. So I'm going to do that by saying yarn add or npm install Jest, and then I'm going to install the preset called Jest Preset SPFx React 16-D. We'll cross our fingers, and the demo worked just fine this morning before the session, so we'll double check it looks good now. Everything should have been cached, so this should go nice and quick. When it sits on 0 of 2100, that's always fun. There we go. And better when the 2100 turns into 4900 and then 3300. Ta-da, we're done. All right, so what did that just do to our project? It did a couple things. So first of all, I scroll down, you'll see that I have Jest installed and I have this preset installed. And what did that do? So under the covers here, what that did is it added in this preset that you'll find right here. Oops, scroll to this. Added in this preset, and this package.json installed all the necessary dependencies and stuff that we needed in order for this thing to work. All right, so it has all the right version numbers and all the stuff that we need for this to work. It also has the configuration here for using Enzyme. It's already got that set up, and it's created its own configuration file for all the stuff that you need in order to do use Jest and Enzyme and all that in your machine. So it makes your life a heck of a lot easier here. It even has, where'd my mouse go? Come back. Where is my mouse? Come back. There we go. Let's see. So we did that, and has everything else all set up that you're going to need with this. I've even gone through, and in these examples here, I've even set up a couple examples here. So if we copy these guys, let's copy, and let's come over to my project. And if I go into source, and let's just drop them into the root here, paste. There we go. So you can see here I've got my sample. Here's a sample component right here. Here is a test associated with it as well. You can either use the out-of-the-box renderer or the Enzyme renderer, explaining how that works. But then how are you actually leveraging this in your project? Well, the other thing that when you installed this, what it did is it created inside the config folder, what it did is it added in this Jest config, and it says, what preset am I using? And so it's basically saying, go use the configuration that package you just installed, go use that configuration that's already been set up for you. And it just tells us where the root directory is. So, ta-da, we're all good. So, and, oh yeah, the last thing it did, it even went in and it set up your special test. It actually did two of them. It did a test and a test watch. So that now if I just run npm test, it should do everything with Jest. So let's give that a shot. Clear it out. I say npm test. You cross your fingers, and hopefully the live demo gods are going to be nice to you. And I did it inside of a VM, so things were a little bit slower, but you can see everything ran within 8 seconds with these tests of not only testing a testable service, but also testing an actual component with the rendering. And you can see here it even generated a snapshot. So the next time I run it, should go a little bit faster, but it's going to match that snapshot. 3, 4, 5, 6. Come on, go before 8. There we go, 2 seconds faster. We can see that the snapshot was valid. So if I go back and look at the code here and open this up and look in the source, and my project's a little messy now because I just threw those files into wherever we had it. Here's the snapshot using the enzyme to JSON, or not enzyme, yeah, enzyme to JSON snapshot as well. So this makes your life a hell of a lot easier. If you want to use these, again, you just check out the blog post that I mentioned a second ago here in the slide. Excuse me, warrior horses, we have something to do here. Move. Well, we'll just do it like that. There you go. David Warner just posted in the chat. So you can take a look at that if you want to learn more about how this stuff works and what, you know, understanding how the pieces are set together. The one thing that I will tell you when you use this, let me open up a browser real quick here. Chrome. Nope, we're not trying Safari. Apple's as bad as Microsoft is and getting them to use your browsers. AndrewConnell.com. Let me find that package really quick. I want to show you one thing, and then I will wrap up as I see how much time we have. Where is it? Right. Enable Gene Jest. And let's find. Scroll bar is going too fast. Let's go to this guy. All right. So let's say, where's the GitHub? So go to the project. So you're going to run into, you may run into something with your project here. And if you look at the issues, you'll see this. You'll see the same command where people keep mentioning the same thing, of a challenge here, where they talk about they're getting like something where things are not running because of you're not importing stuff correctly. And the reason for this is under the covers, Jest is ignoring all of the stuff. It's not processing any of the stuff or transpiling anything from the node modules folder. All of the packages or a lot of the packages that are done for the SharePoint framework and are done in other related packages are all done, using ES6 or all the transpiled down to ES6 and shipped that way. Jest by default is not expecting that. It's expecting them to be as ES5. And so you'll start to see these errors that pop up with things like, I don't understand what the word import is because that's not an ES5 term. It's an ES6 term. When you see these kinds of things, take a second and think about what are you trying to do? Because what I see most of the time is that you're really going to want to mock these up or you want to ignore these things. And if you look in the issues here, I actually give you a couple examples of how you get around it, trying to find a cleaner solution to it. But effectively what you're going to do is, like if you're doing your testing, you shouldn't be running a unit test that checks to see what the current value of my SharePoint environment is. Am I in localhost or I'm in a live environment? You're testing. That doesn't matter, right? That doesn't matter, and it's irrelevant, in fact, because you're not in either one of those environments. You really want to mock that up and have a hard-coded value get returned back to you. So that's where we're seeing most of the challenges of people coming into when they're working with Jest or with other testing tools as well. And just think about, you always want to follow the rule when you're testing of just testing the system under test, your code. You don't want to test Microsoft's code. You don't want to test some other web service or anything. That's not stuff that you can impact. And even if it was, you don't need to be filing a bug in your project for a broken widget that's coming from somebody else's, UI components. In this case here, I'm not referring to the Patterns and Practices project. You want to keep them separate. So that's everything that I want to cover with this. I hope this was useful to you. Those libraries or those packages are out there for anybody to use if you want to use them. They are also part of the Patterns and Practices generator that Stefan Bauer has done. So if you want to end up using React in there, we are using those pieces as well. So it makes your life a hell of a lot easier. Now you don't have to remember all these different versions you have to do. Basically, leave that up to me. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Patrick and Vesa.
Thank you. Great demos today. Thank you, Andrew. Really fantastic stuff to see. I think I'll call it an enhanced testing experience with Jest, and a great way to test out your components. Great stuff from Yannick on the panel control. Really excited to see that. Thank you, everybody, for attending this call. Reminder, do please check out that survey. We appreciate your feedback. I'd love to hear from as many of you as possible. Our next SPFx JavaScript Special Interest Group meeting will be February 14th, 2019. And then our next General Dev Special Interest Group meeting will be next Thursday, February 7th. So look forward to seeing all of you at both of those meetings. And everybody have a great rest of your week. Have a great weekend and have fun. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.